The ancient stones of Hogwarts Castle had always hummed with a rhythm Elias Thorne found comforting. The distant murmur of lessons, the scrape of quills, the occasional burst of laughter from a hidden corridor. For a second-year Muggle-born Ravenclaw who often felt like an observer in the dazzling chaos of the wizarding world, these subtle frequencies were a familiar pulse. He preferred the quiet logic of a forgotten spellbook, the intricate pathways of a complex puzzle, to the unpredictable currents of social interaction. Yet, even in the hushed sanctity of the Ravenclaw common room, high in its lofty tower, an unsettling discord had begun to weave itself into the castle's ancient song. Whispers. They were everywhere, insidious as the chill that seeped from the dungeon walls. Whispers of students found wrong. Not hurt in a duel, not a prank gone awry, but something far more disturbing. Elias, perched on a window seat overlooking the moonlit grounds, tried to dismiss them as typical Hogwarts hysteria. After all, had there not always been tales of ghosts, of forbidden corridors, of things that went bump in the night? But the anxious knot in his stomach tightened with each passing day. It started subtly. A third-year Hufflepuff, usually boisterous, missed classes for 2 days. The official story was a severe case of magical malaise, a vague ailment that left him feeling weak and disoriented. Then, a fifth-year Slytherin was found slumped against a corridor wall, seemingly asleep, but with an unnatural pallor and a faint, peculiar twist to his jaw. He was quickly spirited away to the hospital wing, the incident hushed, but the whispers escalated. Did you see his hand? It looked wrong. Professor McGonagall looked absolutely terrified. Elias, with his meticulously organized mind, filed away each rumor, each unsettling observation. He noticed the prefects walking their rounds with a new, tense vigilance. He saw the professors exchange worried glances, their usual composed masks cracking just slightly. The very air in the castle felt heavier, charged with an unspoken dread. His logical framework, his safe haven, began to fray at the edges one Tuesday afternoon. He was heading to the library, a worn copy of Ancient Runes, a comprehensive guide clutched in his hand, when he passed the entrance to the girls' lavatory on the 3rd floor. Usually, a place of giggling and casual chatter, it was now ominously silent. As he drew closer, a strange, wet gurgling sound echoed from within, followed by a faint, metallic groan that seemed to resonate through the very pipes in the wall beside him. Curiosity, a potent Ravenclaw trait, wrestled with his ingrained caution. He paused, pressing an ear to the cool stone. The gurgling ceased, replaced by a soft, rhythmic drip drip drip, oddly amplified, as if the pipes themselves were weeping. Then a scream. Not a high-pitched shriek of surprise, but a choked, guttural cry, abruptly cut short. Elias's heart hammered against his ribs. Every fiber of his logical mind screamed danger. Retreat, but his feet, as if guided by an unseen force, propelled him towards the lavatory door. It was slightly ajar. Pushing it open with a trembling hand, he peered inside. The scene that greeted him froze the blood in his veins. Penelope Clearwater, a studious Ravenclaw prefect known for her impeccable posture and severe bun, lay sprawled on the cold flagstones. Her normally neat uniform was askew, her head tilted at an impossible angle. But it wasn't just the angle of her head that was wrong. Her entire body seemed twisted. One arm was bent back towards her shoulder blade, fingers splayed in a grotesque imitation of a claw. Her left leg was unnaturally contorted beneath her, as if someone had brutally wrenched it. Her eyes, wide and staring, were fixed on the stained ceiling, but they held no recognition, no spark of life, only a vacant, terrified emptiness. A faint, sickening smell, like stale iron and damp earth, hung in the air. And from the row of sinks along the wall, directly above where Penelope lay, a single, rusty tap dripped relentlessly, it sounded like a morbid metronome. Elias stumbled back, a gasp trapped in his throat. This wasn't a curse he recognized from any textbook. This wasn't a duel or a jinx. This was mangled. The whispers coalesced into a horrifying certainty. This was what they meant by crooked. Professor Flitwick, Alerted by the lingering echo of Penelope's strangled cry and Elias's choked gasp, arrived moments later, his usually cheerful face paling to an alarming shade of gray. Other students, drawn by the commotion, began to gather. Lyra Vance, a fiery Gryffindor in Elias's year, pushed past the growing crowd, her vivid red hair a blur. Her eyes, usually sparkling with mischievous energy, widened in horror as she saw Penelope. "Merlin's beard," she breathed, her voice barely a whisper. "What is that?" Before Flitwick could fully process the scene, Professor McGonagall swept in, her face a mask of grim determination that did little to hide the terror in her eyes. "Clear out. All of you. Immediately." Her voice, usually sharp, held a tremor of fear. Elias, numb with shock, was ushered away, but the image of Penelope, so utterly wrong, was seared into his mind. He found himself gravitating towards the edges of conversations in the Great Hall, straining to hear snippets of whispered theories. "They say it's a curse," a Hufflepuff whispered, huddled with friends. "An old one. From Salazar Slytherin's time." "No, it's gotta be a beast," another argued, her voice trembling. "Something that can twist you up like that. Like a giant spider or something worse. I heard it moves through the walls," a third-year Ravenclaw, usually known for his logical deductions, stated with a chilling certainty. "Through the pipes. That's why you never see it. Through the pipes." Elias's mind, still reeling from the shock, latched onto that. The gurgling, the metallic groan, the dripping tap. He remembered the faint sound of something resonating through the wall beside him just moments before Penelope's scream. He had tried to rationalize it then as old plumbing, but now the whispers coalesced into a terrifying, singular entity, the Crooked Man. A monstrous being unseen that slithered through the castle's ancient conduits, selecting its victims. It sounded like a children's ghost story, utterly illogical, yet the proof lay chillingly real in the hospital wing, where Penelope and the others now lay, catatonic and horrifically contorted. His anxiety, usually a low hum, roared to life, amplified by a crushing wave of guilt. He had been there. He had heard something. He didn't know what he could have done, but the what-ifs tormented him. His rational mind, which usually sought comfort and order, found itself in a chaos it couldn't compute. This wasn't a problem that could be solved by reading a textbook or deciphering a riddle. This was raw, horrifying, inexplicable. Over the next few days, the castle transformed. Common rooms emptied. Students hurried through corridors, eyes darting, backs pressed against walls. The easy camaraderie vanished, replaced by a pervasive paranoia. Even the portraits seemed to watch with wider, more frightened eyes. Elias, usually invisible, found himself scrutinizing every detail. He walked with his head tilted, listening for the insidious gurgle, the telltale metallic groan. He started to notice things he had never paid attention to before. The ancient, intricate pipe systems that crisscrossed the castle, often hidden behind tapestries or within thick stone walls, but sometimes visible, snaking along ceilings or running openly beneath the floorboards in forgotten corners. One evening, unable to shake the image of Penelope, Elias found himself wandering the deserted 7th-floor corridor, far from the bustling thoroughfares. He was trying to piece together a timeline, a pattern, anything that made sense. Penelope had been found near a lavatory, the Slytherin near a washroom in the dungeons. The Hufflepuff, they said, had been found in his common room, near the kitchens, which were riddled with steam pipes. As he walked, a faint, metallic clink echoed from the wall beside him. He froze, his breath catching in his throat. He pressed his hand against the cold stone. Nothing. But a second later, a subtle thrumming, like a low vibration, began to emanate from beneath his palm. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. He peered closer at the wall, running his fingers along the rough mortar. There, beneath a loose stone, where the wall met a hidden service passage, he found it. A minuscule streak of dark, viscous liquid, almost black in the dim light, glistening faintly. It looked like rust, but thicker, somehow alive. He touched it, and a shudder ran through him. It was cold, strangely slick, and had that same faint, metallic tang he'd smelled in the lavatory. This was no ordinary plumbing issue. This was no common curse. His analytical mind, though still trembling with fear, clicked into gear. This wasn't just whispers anymore. This was a physical trace. A trail. If the crooked man moved through the pipes, then the pipes were the key. He wasn't just observing anymore. He was investigating. A terrifying thought, but one that settled a strange, cold resolve in his gut. He had to understand. He had to stop it. He looked at the dark, glistening smear on the wall, then down the long, empty corridor, suddenly feeling very, very alone. The castle hummed around him, but now its song was a sinister, discordant lullaby. And somewhere within its ancient, pipe-riddled heart, something unseen was still moving. The following morning, a pall thicker than the Scottish mists lay over Hogwarts. Penelope's attack had spread through the student body like an infectious curse, twisting whispers into outright panicked shouts. Elias, still reeling from the sight of his friend, found himself trapped in a cycle of logical analysis and horrifying emotional fallout. He tried to rationalize, to find a pattern, a common magical signature, anything that fit the world he knew. But Penelope's contorted form, the vacant stare, the terrifying silence, it defied all known curses, all logical explanation. The Great Hall, usually a cacophony of cheerful chatter and clanking cutlery, was subdued. Students huddled in nervous groups, their eyes darting, scrutinizing every shadow, every unexpected sound. Conversations died in hushed murmurs, punctuated by the clatter of a dropped fork, which would make half the hall jump. Professor McGonagall's usually stern expression was etched with worry lines, her pronouncements about staying in groups and being vigilant doing little to quell the rising tide of fear. Then came the next victim. It was a third-year Hufflepuff named Colin, found crumpled in the potions corridor, just outside Snape's dungeon. He was discovered by a frantic first year, who let out a scream that echoed through the castle for what felt like an eternity. Elias was on his way to Transfiguration, his mind still picking at the threads of Penelope's incident, when he heard it. He arrived just as Professor Snape, his face a mask of cold fury, was directing two stunned prefects to levitate Colin to the hospital wing. The Hufflepuff boy lay twisted, his limbs bent at unnatural angles, his eyes wide and unseeing, a faint tremor running through his body. He was crooked. The sight hit Elias with the force of a physical blow. Colin, a boisterous, perpetually cheerful boy who always offered a kind word, reduced to this grotesque tableau. It was then that the logical walls Elias had built around himself began to crumble. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't some dark curse from an obscure text. This was real, horrifying, and happening again. And again. That afternoon, a Ravenclaw prefect, a 7th year named Eleanor, was found near the Olary, her body folded into an impossible knot, face frozen in a rictus of silent terror. The pattern was becoming clear, but offered no solace. The victims were found in disparate parts of the castle, their only commonality the horrific transformation. The whispers about the crooked man grew louder, carrying with them the chilling certainty that whatever it was, it moved through the very fabric of Hogwarts itself. The pipes, the old heating conduits, the forgotten tunnels, nowhere felt safe. Elias spent his evenings hunched over ancient texts in the library, ignoring the concerned glances of Madame Pants. He delved into curses of transformation, body-altering jinxes, even Muggle medical conditions, desperate to find an explanation, a cure. But nothing matched. The victims weren't merely paralyzed, they were twisted, fundamentally altered, their minds trapped somewhere beyond reach. The lack of any magical residue, any detectable spell signature, was the most disturbing aspect. It was as if the magic itself was too old, too subtle, or too insidious to be recognized by modern enchantment. One evening, as the October moon cast long, skeletal shadows through the library windows, a flash of red hair caught his eye. Lyra Vance, the spirited Gryffindor, was browsing the same section of ancient runes Elias had just scoured. Her usual confident stride was hesitant, her emerald eyes narrowed in thought. She looked troubled, her chin resting on a hand as she flipped through a dusty tome. "Finding anything helpful?" Elias asked, his voice low, startling her. Lyra jumped, then scowled. Thorne, don't sneak up on people. You're jumpier than a house elf with a broken plate. She frowned, her bravado faltering. No, not really. Just more ancient gibberish about binding charms and warding rituals. Nothing about that. She gestured vaguely towards the castle beyond the windows. You. Elias shook his head, pushing his glasses up his nose. Nothing concrete. The attacks defy standard magical explanation. No dark arts signatures, no known curses cause this specific type of physical and mental disfigurement. It's unique. Unique and utterly terrifying, Lyra muttered, closing her book with a thud. One of my dorm mates, Sally, she just keeps talking about the crooked man in the pipes. I told her it was nonsense, just a story to scare first years, but now I'm not so sure. How else could it get around so fast without anyone seeing it? Her voice was laced with a vulnerability Elias hadn't heard from her before. Elias straightened. He had dismissed the pipe theory as student rumor, but Lyra's words, combined with the disparate locations of the attacks, struck a chord. The pipes, he repeated, a flicker of something new in his analytical mind. It makes a twisted kind of sense. The castle's plumbing and forgotten conduits run everywhere. A spirit, an entity, could move unseen. Lyra's eyes widened slightly. So, you think it's true? There's a crooked man crawling through the walls. A shiver ran down her spine. I don't think anything without evidence, Vance, Elias said, though his tone was less dismissive and more thoughtful. But it's a hypothesis. If it moves through the infrastructure, then finding its point of origin, or at least its method of travel, might be key. Well, then we need to find it, Lyra declared, her Gryffindor courage resurfacing. I can't just sit around while more people get twisted. Penelope was your friend, right? I heard about what happened. Her gaze softened, a flash of genuine empathy. We have to do something. Elias looked at her, truly looked at her. Lyra's impulsiveness often grated on his careful nature, but her fierce loyalty and readiness to act were undeniably inspiring. Doing something is good, he conceded. But doing something smart is better. We need information. Something beyond student gossip and half-formed theories. So, what's your genius Ravenclaw plan? Lyra asked, a hint of challenge in her voice, but also respect. Elias turned back to the shelves, his mind already racing. If this crooked man is an entity, especially one powerful enough to do this, it's not a new phenomenon. Hogwarts has existed for 1,000 years. There have to be records, obscure histories, something that mentions its existence, or at least the kind of magic it uses. They spent the next few days in a tense, unspoken alliance. Lyra, with her boundless energy, helped Elias navigate the labyrinthine corridors, searching for forgotten nooks, disused classrooms, and abandoned storage rooms, places where something ancient might be hidden. Elias, in turn, focused on the library, sifting through texts on dark spirits, ancestral curses, and even Muggle folklore about shapeless entities and things that dwell in darkness. Their efforts felt futile. The panic in the castle intensified. A Slytherin first year was found in the common room, and the chilling proximity of the attack sent students into a near frenzy. Classes were becoming sparsely attended, and parents' owls flooded the school, demanding answers and safe passage home for their children. It was during one of these frantic searches that Lyra stumbled upon it. They were in a disused storage closet in the dungeons, behind a stack of broken Quidditch brooms and moth-eaten tapestries. Lyra, trying to move a heavy crate, accidentally knocked a loose stone in the wall. A small, dark cavity was revealed. Elias. Look, she whispered, her voice tight with excitement. Elias peered into the gap. Inside, tucked away in the musty darkness, was a small, leather-bound book. It was old, the cover faded and cracked, without any title or recognizable symbol. The clasp was rusted, but Elias managed to pry it open. The parchment within was brittle and yellowed, covered in elegant, looping script that Elias recognized as a very old form of English, interspersed with what appeared to be ancient runes and some unfamiliar symbols. It wasn't a diary in the traditional sense, more a series of fragmented observations and reflections, written in a hand that spoke of an educated, but deeply disturbed mind. Elias carefully turned the pages, Lyra peering over his shoulder, her breath held. The master's vision, pure and unyielding. The seed of discord must be purged, the unworthy banished from these sacred halls. Salazar's intent was clear, a sanctuary for the truly gifted, not a haven for the weak, the impure, the muggles who soil our ancient arts. Elias felt a chill. Salazar Slytherin. This wasn't just old, it was ancient. He turned to another page, the writing growing more erratic, the tone darker. The Guardian waits. Its purpose, a silent sentinel against the tide of impurity. Through the conduits it moves, unseen, unheard, a cleansing shadow. It seeks out the taint, the softness, the lack of will. Its touch purifies through twisting, revealing the true nature of their spirit by contorting their flesh. A mirror of their inner weakness, externalized for all to see. Lyra gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. A guardian? Purifies through twisting? That's what's happening to them. Elias's mind raced, connecting the dots. Through the conduits, the pipes. It explains everything. The unseen movement, the physical corruption. He continued reading, his voice barely a whisper. They call it the Crooked Man, a name whispered in fear by those who witness its passing. A foolish name. It is not a man, but an instrument, a spirit forged from the Founder's dark will, bound to the very stones of this castle, to its hidden waterways. Its purpose, to guard the chamber, to prepare it for the true heir, to rid this place of those who do not belong. The Chamber of Secrets, Lyra breathed, her eyes wide with dawning horror. But everyone thought it was a basilisk. This is something else entirely. Elias felt a cold dread seep into his bones, colder than the dungeon air. This diary, this twisted, ancient account, spoke of a horrifying truth. Salazar Slytherin's chamber didn't hold a monster of legend, but a spirit, a guardian, that twisted its victims not to kill, but to purify. The victims weren't just unlucky, they were deemed unworthy. He turned another page, his fingers trembling slightly. The next entry was stark, chilling, and ended abruptly. The guardian grows restless. The influx of unworthy blood in these halls stirs it from its slumber. Its method is precise, its curse unbreakable, its will an echo of Salazar's own. It drains the spirit, leaving only the shell, a monument to their impurity. Only by understanding its true nature, by confronting the darkness from which it springs, can it be appeased or perhaps banished. But to confront it, one must first find the true entrance to its domain, the heart of Salazar's intent. For it is there, in the deepest reaches of the chamber, that the guardian truly resides, awaiting the heir, silently twisting the very foundations of this school. The last words blurred before Elias's eyes, not from fatigue, but from the terrifying weight of their meaning. The diary didn't just reveal the Crooked Man, it revealed its purpose, its source, and the location of its lair. The Chamber of Secrets wasn't just a hidden room, it was the nexus of this terror. And to stop it, they had to go there. Elias looked at Lyra, her face pale, reflecting his own growing fear. The path ahead was clear, but impossibly perilous. The ancient oak doors of Professor Finch's office creaked shut with a sigh, muffling the distant sounds of students rushing to dinner. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old parchment, forgotten tea, and the subtle, metallic tang of a dozen active spell matrices. Bookshelves groaned under the weight of tomes that looked as if they hadn't been opened since the last Gringotts audit, their spines cracked and faded. Elias, a meticulous diagram of Hogwarts' inner workings spread across a cluttered desk, felt a familiar tremor of anxiety, quickly overridden by the cold burn of his intellectual curiosity. Across from him, Lyra tapped an impatient rhythm on a dusty volume of obscure charms and their corruptions, her usually bright eyes shadowed with worry. Professor Finch, meanwhile, peered at them over half-moon spectacles, his own gaze a curious blend of concern and academic fascination. Right then, Finch began, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. The diary provides some unsettling implications. Salazar Slytherin, it seems, had a more holistic vision for the chamber than merely housing a beast to purge Muggle-borns. A guardian, it says. A cleanser. He gestured vaguely towards a tome open on his own desk, its pages filled with intricate, swirling runes that seemed to shift in the candlelight. And that, Elias, is where ancient warding and curse lore become inextricably linked. Elias traced a finger along a faint, almost invisible line on his map, a minor drainage pipe running beneath the third-floor corridor. The diary also mentions conduits of essence and a spirit woven into the very stone. It sounds less like a creature and more like a living curse, one that permeates the structure itself. He looked up, meeting Finch's gaze. And Lyra's account of what she felt, that cold, twisting sensation before Colin fell, it aligns. Lyra shivered, rubbing her arms. It was like being pulled inside out, but without moving. Just wrong. Like my bones were twisting, even though they weren't. And the cold, it wasn't just physical, it was in my mind. Professor Finch nodded slowly, steepling his fingers. Indeed. That aligns with the descriptions of a specific strain of ancient ward curses. Unlike typical hexes, these aren't merely cast upon a target. They are woven into the fabric of a place, designed to manifest through its inherent magical currents. If Salazar intended a guardian spirit, binding it to the castle's circulatory system, its pipes, its very stone, would be an act of profound and profoundly dark magic. He slid a heavy, leather-bound book towards Elias. Its title, The Serpent's Coil, Interpretations of Founding Magic, was embossed in faded silver. This details the theory that founder magic, especially in the early days, wasn't always about explicit spells. It was about intent. Salazar, a powerful legilimens and a master of esoteric curses, could have imbued the very concept of purification into the castle's core, manifesting through a bound entity that interprets that intent in its own grotesque way. Elias flipped through the dense pages, his keen mind absorbing the complex theories. So, if it's bound to the castle's plumbing, it's not just a creature moving through the pipes, but the pipes themselves are its veins, its nervous system? His voice tightened, a new, horrifying understanding dawning. That's why no one sees it. It's not an intruder. It's an intrinsic part of the attacks. It doesn't need to manifest physically until the moment of its strike. Lyra leaned forward, her earlier impatience replaced by a sharp focus. But how does it choose? How does it know who to attack? Finch steepled his fingers again, his eyes distant. The diary hinted at unworthy and impure. Salazar's original prejudice, perhaps twisted by centuries of isolation and its own dark magic. It could be detecting subtle magical resonances, a perceived discord with its corrupted interpretation of the founder's will. Or perhaps, it simply needs proximity to a viable victim within its network. Elias's gaze snapped back to his map. He'd spent hours poring over old blueprints, cross-referencing them with the fragmented knowledge of the castle's plumbing system he gleaned from various house elves, and even a surprisingly talkative portrait of a disgruntled plumber from the 17th century. He had sketches of the main conduits, the forgotten overflow pipes, the intricate network that snaked through every floor, behind every wall. He'd meticulously marked the locations of each attack. Now, a horrifying pattern began to emerge. It's not just the main sewer lines, Elias murmured, his finger tracing a path from the girls' lavatory where Lyra had encountered it, down through the dungeons, and then across to the hospital wing. It's connected to everything. The freshwater pipes, the drainage, the steam vents. It's a living, breathing network. And the attacks aren't random. They occur where there's a direct, accessible conduit to a main artery of the system. He pointed to a cluster of red marks near the dungeons. This section, here, under the Slytherin common room, is an old service shaft for the kitchens, but it connects to a forgotten branch of the main sewage line. And the second attack, near the Transfiguration courtyard, there's a leaky pipe in the wall leading directly to a large waste disposal pipe. So it's not just moving through the pipes, but using them as conduits for its curse, Lyra clarified, her face grim. It doesn't need to be physically present to deliver its twisted magic. Precisely, Finch confirmed. The Crooked Man, if that's truly what it is, isn't a physical entity in the traditional sense. It's a distributed consciousness, a malevolent spirit bound to the network itself. When it strikes, it's an outflowing of its corrupting influence, channeled through the water, the air, the very vibrations of the pipes. Its attacks don't kill directly because its intent isn't annihilation, but perversion. It wants to twist, to disable, to contort its victims both physically and mentally, leaving them as living monuments to its horrifying purpose. Elias felt a cold dread creep into his bones, far deeper than any anxiety he'd experienced before. This wasn't a monster to be fought with spells, but a fundamental corruption, a cancer woven into the very heart of Hogwarts. His friend, Colin, was just one of its victims, his cheerful spirit twisted into a catatonic horror. The thought fueled a grim resolve. The diary mentions something about the heart of the network, Elias said, recalling a particularly cryptic passage. It spoke of a central nexus where its essence was most potent, where Salazar forged its connection to the castle. Finch's eyes gleamed with a spark of excitement, quickly tempered by caution. The Chamber of Secrets, then. Not merely a room, but likely a chamber of binding. That's where the crooked man's influence would be anchored. To sever its connection, to undo this ancient curse, that's where we would need to strike. Elias traced a line with his finger, from the girls' lavatory entrance they already knew, deep into the uncharted depths of his map, imagining the labyrinthine pathways. But the chamber, it's sealed. And Lyra, you said the attack began when you were near the entrance, but Colin was further away. This means it can cast its shadow, its curse, over a significant range. That's the insidious nature of it, Finch agreed. The more potent its anchor, the further its influence can reach through its conduits. And if the chamber is its heart, it will be guarded. Not just by traps, but by the very essence of the crooked man itself, concentrated and powerful. So we need to get to the chamber, but how do we even get past the entrance again? Lyra asked, her hand instinctively going to her wand. And what do we do when we get there? It's not like you can just banish a sentient pipe system. Elias, momentarily lost in the complexity, looked from the map to Finch, then to Lyra. His analytical mind, usually so quick to find a solution, felt overwhelmed. This was more than a puzzle. It was a battle against something ancient and fundamentally magical, beyond his textbooks. He looked at the marks on the map, the chilling evidence of suffering. Colin's distorted face flashed in his mind. He couldn't let his logic freeze him now. He had to act. He took a deep breath, pushing down the rising panic. The diary indicated the chamber could be accessed by a specific command, something in parcel tongue, spoken at the sink. But it also suggested there were other ways. Older ways. Passages that existed before Salazar sealed his secrets. He pointed to a faint, almost invisible line on his map, a hypothetical conduit running parallel to the main sewer line, then diverging sharply. A hidden network, perhaps designed for maintenance or escape routes. A way to bypass the main entrance if one knew how to access it from the inside. Finch nodded, a slow, knowing smile spreading across his lips. Ah, yes. The forgotten service tunnels. Every great magical structure has them. A designer's oversight or perhaps a failsafe. If we can map those out, Elias, we might find an alternative entry. A back door to the beast's lair. Elias's eyes narrowed, a cold determination setting in. And if we can get into the chamber, Professor, how do we stop it? How do we break a curse that's been festering for centuries, woven into the very stone of the school? Professor Finch paused, his expression serious. That, Elias, is the true challenge. It won't be with brute force. You cannot simply blast away a spiritual entity bound by ancient magic. We must understand its nature, its purpose, as distorted as it has become. We must find its weakness, its point of vulnerability, and sever its connection to the castle without destroying the castle itself. It will require more than just logic, Elias. It will require insight and courage. Elias felt the weight of those words, the enormity of the task. He looked at the map, at the intertwining lines representing the castle's dark arteries. The crooked man was a terrifying puzzle, and he, Elias Thorne, was going to solve it. His gaze drifted to a particular section of the map, a complex knot of pipes and forgotten conduits deep beneath the dungeons, not far from the suspected location of the chamber. There was a section there, an old, disused drainage pipe that seemed to diverge from the rest of the system, ending in a curious, unlabeled cavity. It felt significant. "I think," Elias said, his voice quiet but firm, "I know where to start looking for that back door." He looked up at Lyra, then at Finch, his eyes alight with a newfound, terrifying purpose. "Tomorrow, we explore." The air in the damp, forgotten corridor beneath the dungeons hung thick and still, smelling of whetstone and ancient metal. Elias clutched the faded parchment from Professor Finch, his fingers tracing a crude, dotted line that converged on a section of wall known only to maintenance elves and forgotten blueprints. Lyra, wand already in hand, peered at the grime-covered stones, her breath fogging in the chill. "Are you absolutely certain, Thorne?" Lyra's voice, though steady, held a tremor of nervous anticipation. "This is considerably less grand than I imagined Salazar Slytherin's personal entrance would be." Elias adjusted his spectacles, his gaze scanning the minute details of the masonry. "Professor Finch believes the grand entrance, if there ever was one, was a decoy. The diary hints at Salazar's true intent for this place, not just a lair for a beast, but a conduit, a purification artery. And what's more arterial than the castle's very bloodstream? Its plumbing." He pointed to a corroded iron grate barely visible beneath a cascade of moldering ivy. "This isn't just a drain. This is it." Lyra raised an eyebrow, a flicker of apprehension crossing her face. "A drain? So much for dramatic flair." She approached the grate cautiously, her wand tip glowing. "Any idea how to open it, Brainiac?" Elias pulled out the diary once more, flipping to the page Professor Finch had marked with a charm. The passage mentions the serpent's hidden mouth, thirsting for the unworthy's truth. It's a riddle, but Finch suggested it refers to an ancient runic command for purification, specifically tied to intent. He closed his eyes, concentrating, then pointed his wand. "Purger sanguis Salazar," he whispered, the Latin rolling awkwardly off his Muggle-born tongue. "Cleanse, blood of Salazar." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a groan that seemed to echo from the very foundations of the castle, the grate began to glow with a sickly green light. The rusted iron shimmered, then dissolved into a swirling vortex of emerald mist, revealing a gaping, dark maw. It wasn't a pipe, not exactly, but a circular tunnel of dark, oily stone, slick and impossibly deep. A faint, putrid smell, like stagnant water and something rotten, drifted out. "Well, that's inviting," Lyra muttered, but she took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. "After you, then, Ravenclaw." Elias hesitated for only a fraction of a second, the analytical part of his mind screaming about structural integrity and unknown dangers. But the image of his twisted friend, a shell of their former self, burned in his mind. He couldn't turn back. Taking a steadying breath, he stepped into the gloom, Lyra close behind. The tunnel descended sharply, winding like a serpent's coil. The air grew heavier, colder, and the faint whispers Elias had heard throughout the castle seemed to intensify here, a cacophony of distorted murmurs just beyond the reach of comprehension. The walls, slick with an unidentifiable slime, seemed to pulse faintly with an internal light, casting grotesque, shifting shadows. "Keep your wand up, Lyra," Elias cautioned, his voice tight. He aimed his own wand, murmuring, "Lumos Maxima," bathing the immediate vicinity in a powerful beam. Suddenly, the tunnel seemed to constrict. The walls pressed inward, the stone groaning as if under immense pressure. It wasn't a physical change, Elias realized with a jolt, but an illusion, a powerful psychic assault designed to crush their spirits. The whispers coalesced, forming distorted accusations. Unworthy. Weak. Crooked. Lyra gasped, pressing a hand to her temple. "My head, it feels like it's being squeezed." Elias fought against the rising panic, against the feeling of the walls closing in, of his own bones trying to twist. This is what it does, he thought, remembering the descriptions of the victims. It starts with the mind. It's a psychic ward, Lyra. Don't let it in. Focus on the truth. He squeezed his eyes shut for a moment, picturing the solid stone, the steady air. It's an illusion, Lyra. Fight it. Lyra cried out, stumbling, but her eyes, though wide with fear, still held a spark of defiance. She took a deep, shuddering breath. The truth is I'm Lyra Vance, and I'm not getting squashed by a creepy tunnel. She jabbed her wand forward, not with a spell, but with pure Gryffindor will. Finite incantatem. The tunnel wavered, the oppressive feeling receding slightly, though not entirely gone. Elias focused his own mind, his Ravenclaw logic fighting the insidious suggestions. This is not real. Slowly, painstakingly, the walls returned to their true, if still narrow, dimensions. Good one, Lyra, Elias panted, genuinely impressed. Her impulsiveness had, in this case, been exactly what was needed to break through the mental paralysis. They continued their descent, the psychic pressure a dull throb at the back of their minds. After what felt like an eternity, the tunnel opened into a vast, cavernous space. This was not a natural cave, but a massive, ancient chamber supported by colossal pillars carved with grotesque, twisting figures. The air here was even colder, carrying a faint, metallic tang. Along the walls, Elias saw them, more carvings, but these were detailed, depicting what looked like ancient rituals. A robed figure, unmistakable as Salazar Slytherin from historical depictions, stood before an altar, surrounded by figures that began normal but rapidly contorted, their limbs and faces twisting into unnatural shapes. "This is it," Elias whispered, his voice catching in his throat. "The chamber. And these are the crooked man's victims." Lyra stared at the carvings, a shudder running through her. He was doing this from the beginning? Why? Elias moved closer to a particularly large carving, tracing the lines of a figure whose spine seemed to spiral into a knot. Professor Finch hinted at Salazar's darker intent. The diary mentioned a purifier, a gatekeeper of worthiness. He wasn't just hiding a basilisk, Lyra. He was cultivating an entity, a guardian that would cleanse the school of those he deemed unworthy. As they ventured further into the chamber, the ground beneath their feet began to shift. The very stones seemed to ripple, and from cracks in the floor, thick, dark tendrils of what looked like solidified shadow began to writhe and curl upwards. These tendrils moved with uncanny speed, grasping at their ankles. "It's another ward," Lyra yelled, unleashing a flurry of cutting charms. The tendrils recoiled, hissing, but new ones immediately rose to take their place, thicker and faster. Elias analyzed their movement. "They're not merely physical, Lyra. They respond to negative emotion. Fear, doubt. They're trying to ensnare us psychologically as well." He remembered Professor Finch's words about ancient magic feeding on discord. "Don't fight them with brute force. Try light. Hope." Lyra looked at him, bewildered, but then a grim determination set in. "Hope, got it." She didn't cast a typical charm. Instead, she concentrated, picturing sunlight, warmth, the feeling of victory. Her wand glowed with a pure, vibrant gold, and when she thrust it forward, a wave of incandescent light burst forth, not searing, but soothing. The shadow tendrils shrieked, recoiling violently as if burned by the sudden purity. They dissolved into wisps of black smoke, leaving behind only the smooth, cold stone. "That was brilliant, Lyra," Elias said, a genuine smile touching his lips. He was learning. He really was. They reached the heart of the chamber, a raised dais dominated by a massive, grotesque statue. It was not of Salazar Slytherin, nor a basilisk, but a multi-limbed, twisted humanoid figure, its face a mask of silent agony, its body impossibly contorted. Around its base, carvings depicted a ritual of binding, not just to the chamber, but to the very plumbing and infrastructure of Hogwarts. "This is it, Lyra," Elias breathed, his voice barely a whisper. "This is the crooked man's effigy. Or perhaps, its original form." He pointed to faint, pulsing lines of dark magic that radiated from the statue, disappearing into the floor, undoubtedly connecting to the pipes they had mapped. "Salazar didn't just create a monster," Elias continued, his mind racing, connecting all the fragmented pieces of information. "He found an ancient spirit, perhaps a protector of the land, an elemental. He twisted it, bound it with his own dark will, and cursed it to purify the unworthy by contorting their bodies and minds. The spirit, corrupted by centuries of isolation and the unending flow of dark magic through its conduits, became the Crooked Man. It's not just an entity in the pipes, it is the pipes, their corrupt will made manifest. The realization hung in the chilling air. The Crooked Man wasn't merely a magical beast, but a perversion of ancient magic, a tragic guardian twisted into a monstrous instrument of fear and pain. Its purpose wasn't to kill, but to transform, to make others reflect its own agonizing corruption. Suddenly, a low, guttural thrum vibrated through the chamber, making the very stone tremble. It wasn't a sound, but a feeling, a pressure that squeezed Elias's chest. The grotesque statue's eyes, carved hollow, began to glow with a faint, malevolent green light. The whispers returned, louder now, clearer, coalescing into a single, chilling thought that permeated their minds. Unworthy. All unworthy. Elias felt a cold dread creep up his spine. They had found the source. They had understood its nature. But understanding, he realized with a jolt, was only the first step. The Crooked Man was here. And it knew they had come. The next step was the hardest of all. The final descent into the Chamber of Secrets was a dizzying plunge, a smooth stone slide that ejected Elias and Lyra into a vast, echoing cavern. It was unlike any chamber Elias had imagined. Gone were the grand, imposing statues he'd read about in other tales. Instead, the chamber was a cavern of grotesque, twisted metal and stone, resembling a giant, ossified internal organ. Thick, serpentine pipes, some as wide as tree trunks, crisscrossed the ceiling and walls, pulsating with an eerie, low hum. They weren't just functional conduits, they were integral to the chamber's architecture, forming pillars, archways, and even a raised dais in the center. The air was heavy, cloying with the metallic tang of old iron and something else, something fetid and ancient, like stagnant water from a forgotten well. Shadows clung to every corner, swirling and deepening as if stirred by an unseen current. This is it, Lyra whispered, her voice barely audible in the oppressive quiet. Her hand instinctively went to her wand, her knuckles white. Elias, though his heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird, felt a strange calm settle over him. He had walked through this moment 1,000 times in his mind, dissecting every possibility, every potential threat. At the chamber's heart, on the raised dais, stood a single, contorted figure carved from dark, crystalline rock. It wasn't an animal or a hero, but a humanoid shape, unnaturally bent at the waist, its limbs elongated and twisted into impossible angles. Its face, though smoothed by time, seemed to scream in silent agony. This was no statue. It was a permanent, horrifying echo of the curse. As they stepped fully onto the chamber floor, the air vibrated. The massive pipes around them began to glow with a faint, sickly green light, and the hum intensified, shifting into a guttural moan that seemed to emanate from the very stone. Shadows detached themselves from the walls, coalescing into a shifting, indistinct form at the base of the twisted statue. It writhed, coalesced, then solidified into something vaguely human-shaped, though its limbs elongated and shortened with terrifying fluidity, mimicking the contortions of the statue. It had no distinct face, only swirling darkness, but 2 pinpricks of malevolent light pulsed where eyes should be. This was the Crooked Man. "You intrude," a voice rasped, not from the figure itself, but from everywhere at once, a chorus of distorted whispers echoing from the pipes. "You are unworthy, impure." Elias felt a cold dread seize him, a primal fear that threatened to paralyze him. This was beyond logic, beyond reason. It was an ancient, predatory malice. Yet Lyra, though visibly trembling, took a defiant step forward. "We're not unworthy," she shouted, her voice cracking but resolute. "You're the one twisting everything." The Crooked Man pulsed, and a tendril of shadow lashed out, impossibly fast, wrapping around a nearby pillar and contorting it with a sickening creak of stone. The implication was clear. It could do the same to them. Salazar's will, the whispers hissed. Purity through suffering. Straighten the crooked. Purge the flawed. Elias clenched his fists, trying to find his footing. His logical mind screamed to retreat, to analyze from a distance, but the image of Percy, his friend, twisted and catatonic, flashed in his mind. He couldn't retreat. This wasn't just a puzzle anymore, it was personal. He took a deep breath, channeling Professor Finch's words. Ancient curses are often more complex than mere destruction, Elias. They are bound by intent, sometimes misinterpreted, sometimes twisted by isolation. To break them, one must understand the original binding, not just the manifestation. You misunderstand. Elias called out, his voice shaking but gaining strength. Salazar wanted order, not torture. He wanted to protect his lineage, not inflict unending agony on innocent students. The crooked man shuddered, its shadowy form briefly fragmenting. Order is purity, through correction. The voices rasped, a hint of confusion in their distorted tones. The crooked must be straightened, not by breaking them. Elias pressed, his analytical mind kicking into overdrive, seeing the cracks in its distorted logic. The diary said Salazar sought unblemished perfection. But perfection isn't achieved by breaking what already exists. It's about guiding it, refining it. You've been here for centuries, isolated, your purpose corrupted by time and your own twisted interpretation. Lyra, seeing Elias engaging the entity, moved to his side, her wand held aloft, eyes scanning for any physical attack. Her presence was a steadying anchor, grounding him in the terrifying reality. What do you know of unblemished perfection? The crooked man snarled, a low, rumbling sound reverberating through the pipes. You are a Muggle-born. Your blood is unclean. The bigotry stung, but Elias pushed past it. My blood has nothing to do with it. Purity, true purity, is about the spirit, the intention. Salazar's fear of impure blood was flawed, but even he, in his desire for a guardian, would not have intended such horrific, endless torment. This is a perversion of his intent, not its fulfillment. He remembered Professor Finch showing him an ancient charm, a restorative spell that could unravel complex transfigurations not by brute force, but by re-establishing the original form. It wasn't about countering, but resetting. You are a guardian, Elias declared, his voice ringing with newfound authority, pushing aside his fear. Your purpose is to guard, to preserve, not to destroy or corrupt. He raised his wand, not with an offensive spell in mind, but with the intricate, multi-layered movements of a charm's master. The curse that binds you, it is ancient, primitive, but it can be realigned. He began to chant, pulling from the archaic phrases Finch had taught him, words intended to speak to foundational magic itself. I invoke the original intent. I recall the founding purpose. Redera integritatem. Riverter formum. Restore integrity. Return to form. As Elias chanted, focusing not on the crooked man's destruction but on its restoration to its intended purpose, Lyra began to cast a powerful Lumos Maxima, flooding the shadowy chamber with brilliant, purifying light. The light struck the crooked man, making it recoil, but more importantly, it seemed to illuminate the intricate magical bindings that pulsed beneath its shadowy form. The crooked man shrieked, a sound of agony and confusion, its form writhing wildly. No, the crooked must remain crooked. But Elias pressed on, pouring every ounce of his analytical focus and his newfound courage into the incantation. He wasn't fighting the crooked man, he was healing the curse that had twisted it. He felt a surge of energy, not raw power, but focused intent, flowing from his wand. The pipes around them groaned, their sickly green glow fading, replaced by a soft, warm light that pulsed in rhythm with Elias's chant. The air, once heavy, lightened. With a final, resounding riverter formum, a wave of shimmering, golden light erupted from Elias's wand, washing over the crooked man. The entity convulsed, its shadowy form stretching, contracting, then shattering like brittle glass. The fragments didn't disappear. Instead, they flowed into the twisted statue on the dais, coalescing, morphing. The grotesque, suffering figure began to shift. The impossible angles softened, the contorted limbs straightened, the pained expression smoothing out. Slowly, impossibly, the statue transformed. No longer a monument to suffering, it became a figure of imposing, yet serene, guardianship. A tall, robed wizard, ancient and dignified, his hands resting on a sturdy staff, his gaze fixed on the chamber entrance, forever watching, forever protecting, but no longer inflicting. It was Salazar Slytherin, perhaps, as he truly intended his guardian to be, stern, watchful, but not cruel. As the transformation completed, a gentle, resonant chime echoed through the chamber. Elias and Lyra felt a wave of calm wash over them, a deep sense of peace that banished the clinging dread. Then, from the pipes, a sound like rushing water began, a different kind of hum, a healing, cleansing current. And in that current, they saw them, shimmering, ethereal forms, like echoes rising from deep water. They were the victims, the crooked, their twisted forms slowly unraveling, their catatonic states dissolving. Percy, Elias's friend, was among them, his translucent form now whole, his eyes open and clear, a faint smile on his lips. They were still ethereal, not fully corporeal, but they were free. A soft, melancholic whisper, now clear and untwisted, emanated from the newly formed statue. The purpose, understood, at last. The chamber, once a place of horror, now felt merely ancient, solemn, and quiet. The air was clean. The spell was broken. The crooked man was gone, replaced by a silent guardian and a renewed sense of purpose. Elias, exhausted but exhilarated, slumped against a pipe, Lyra immediately at his side, steadying him. He had faced his greatest fear, not with brute force, but with understanding, empathy, and the courage to trust his own evolving intuition. He had transformed from an anxious observer to a leader who had restored balance to Hogwarts. But as the echoes of the ancient magic faded, a new thought stirred in Elias's mind. The chamber had been cleared, the curse broken, and the guardian set right. But if Salazar's true intent had been so misinterpreted, if his original magic had been so twisted, what other hidden truths, what other forgotten intentions, lay buried beneath Hogwarts? The world he thought he knew, the wizarding world, suddenly seemed far more complex, far more nuanced, and infinitely more intriguing than the logical puzzles he once preferred. His journey had ended here, but in the quiet aftermath, Elias knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that it was only just the beginning.